Jak II is the sequel to Jak and Daxter, one of my favorite platformers of all time, one of the greatest PS2 games to ever exist, and a true piece of brilliance that showed Naughty Dog could easily find success without Crash by their side. It clearly could have just gotten a new sequel each year for the next few years like Crash did, with each one of them adding new stuff, making good leaps forward, and all becoming classics. But that's not what happened. Rather than make a straightforward series that followed the same incredible gameplay style of the first Jak and Daxter, Naughty Dog took one of the greatest risks imaginable for a game developer and something that is pretty much forbidden by most game companies these days: trying something new. Jak II is nothing like the first game at all. The gameplay has been shifted to focus more on the open world, with missions rather than collectibles, and gunplay added in that often overshadows the platforming, which is retained from the first game but is not the main focus anymore whatsoever. And I really have to respect that. Though I love Jak and Daxter, this new Jak gameplay style is a massive risk that I assure you most companies would never have taken. It was very brave of them to do this. Well, sort of, and definitely shocked me going into this game for the first time. But did this risk pay off, or is Jak II a disappointment? Well, let's find out. And yeah, I know this video is probably way longer than the review of the first game, so sorry about not keeping my promise to make this Jak review series shorter than normal. But this game was a massive shock to my system and way longer than I expected. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'll begin with the gameplay, which is the most important part. Jak II continues to have the platforming moveset carried over from Jak and Daxter, but with some strange control alterations and a bit more of a smooth feeling, which is sometimes great and other times not. It's pretty much the exact same though, so I'll give it a pass for some slightly annoying changes, because it's still really good. But there's not that much platforming in this game at all compared to the first game. There's still quite a bit, and it's all amazing, definitely the highlight of the game for me, but it's mostly traded for the brand new gunplay. This is also really fun and interesting on paper. You have 4 different guns that all function very differently and offer up a nice bit of variety. One that's basically a shotgun, one's a rifle, one's a machine gun, and the final one fires a giant lightning bolt, which is just awesome. These are all really fun to use for the most part, and there are quite a few moves that you can use in tandem with the shooting to perform combos that make things even more satisfying. And for those of you who say that the shooting sucks because you just need to perform the same jump, spin, and shoot move over and over again, I say that point is unfair, because when I tried doing that, it was very hard to complete most of the gunplay missions. So I don't think it's as repetitive in that aspect as many others say. Some parts have light puzzle solving, and these rock as well. Pretty much each part of these missions is really fun, and I loved it when I got the chance to jump and shoot my way through enemies, scale massive and impressive set pieces, and drive around the worst open world I've ever gone through. Yeah, so this game falls apart quite quickly. Those things that I just mentioned, that was all I could think of about this gameplay that I like, the basic shooting and platforming. And that might seem like what you do for most of the game, so naturally I would love the gameplay because of those. But you'd be dead wrong, because this game actually doesn't spend most of the time with these awesome missions, but rather shoehorning in every last possible annoying trend from the time it came out to bog it down and turn it from a great, well-designed sequel to one of the most ridiculous piles of inflammatory nonsense I've played in quite some time. I know it seems like I just started to praise the gameplay, but trust me, that's accurate to my experience playing through Jak II. At first, I thought it was a great, though slightly simple game, and would have given it a 4 out of 5. But then, annoying driving mechanics and difficulty spikes pushed it down to a 3.5, which is how it remained for most of Acts 1 and 2. But then, about a quarter through Act 2, I began to see just how aggravating this game was. Awful missions sprouted up everywhere, making me so frustrated that anything above a 3 would have been ridiculous. Then I started to fall for it again, with the end of Act 2 being absolute genius, making it a 3.5 again. And then, with Act 3, the game completely lost it. In the third act, Jak II goes from being a good, though flawed sequel to one of the worst games I've played in a very long time. By the time I had finally beaten it, I realized that I probably never should have even given my time to the game. But why is that exactly? Well, the gameplay flaws are apparent very early on. The first major design problem with Jak II is how it handles its open world. The first game took the tight design of Banjo and Spyro and blew up the scale while still filling every nook and cranny with something to discover so that it never got boring, as an open world game should be. It's why Spider-Man, Horizon, and Breath of the Wild are so good. But Jak II has practically nothing in its world. You drive around these narrow corridors with NPCs walking and driving everywhere, Crimson Guard enemies scouring each and every corner, and occasional challenges that suck lemons harder than a pirate with scurvy. Ring challenges were the only less than stellar thing about Jak and Daxter, but compare those to the ring challenges in this game, and you realize that the ring challenges from before were actually pretty good. Can we go back to that, actually? And what's worse is that these garbage challenges that are frustrating due to strict time limits, weird placement of the rings, awful Crimson Guard enemies, who we'll get to shortly, and narrow turns are the only pieces of side content apart from these precursor hunts that are so lifeless and uncreative that you might actually prefer the ring challenges. Because though they make you want to jump out of a window, they at least have a little bit of effort put into them. There are also a few other side missions that are so rare that they're probably just made up by the people who defend this game to make it seem better. But, to their dismay, this game is not only hurt by the severely boring open world and lack of anything to do outside of story missions, but they also make the open world a massive part of the game. You will probably spend more time traveling between each mission than actually doing the damn missions. It's so padded and needlessly extended. They even made sure to put every character that gives you missions in the furthest possible locations from each other on the map to make you spend even more time on these annoying vehicles that control pretty well, but the control doesn't even matter because the world design is so clearly built for a person and not a vehicle, so you'll constantly be bumping into things every few seconds. And this sucks even more because a huge number of missions use this setup, so you can spend more time with this horrendous gameplay style, and these bumps will prove fatal to you because you'll have to get a new vehicle before the time limit runs out, or avoid destroying enough vehicles to even stay alive. It's just so obvious that they didn't have a ton for the player to even do, so they just dragged everything out. I've talked a lot about this as a common flaw in open world games, but this game takes the meaning of emptiness to a whole new level. It seriously takes the cake. I mean, goddamn, I critique Days Gone for feeling a little empty, but compared to this game, that is the most brilliant world design ever thought of by a human being. This seriously just sucked the life out of me while playing this game. And every time I finished a mission, instead of being excited to see the next part of the story, I was either dreading having to fly around for minutes on end just to keep playing, or having to do that, and then play an insanely frustrating, unfair, and poorly designed mission that involves more driving. Oh, and what's that? You think this open world doesn't sound terrible enough? Well, you're in luck, because there's one more very red cherry on top of this sundae of my fury towards this open world. Get it? Because they're called Crimson Guard, and crimson is a shade of red? Okay, that was a bad one. The Crimson Guard. With those 3 words, I may have just given you, who have played this game, a chill. If you've ever played this game, you should know my absolute hatred for this mechanic. These guys function similar to police in a Grand Theft Auto game, I assume. I don't know, I've never played one. But basically, if you do something sussy, they'll be there to come after you. But Jesus Jonathan Jelly, this is one of the most idiotic executions of an okay mechanic possible. First off, the Crimson Guard don't do a damn thing if you murder countless civilians with your reckless driving, or hover in a no-hover zone, as they'll very nicely remind you 1,000,000 godforsaken times. And trust me, they repeat every line to no end in any of their attack modes. which really gets on your nerves considering how long you'll be flying through this barren hellscape. And yeah, that's right, I said barren, with an A, as in the antagonist of the game, Baron Praxis. Okay, that was another bad one, I'm sorry. Not only do they repeat their lines, but they also just don't care if you do pretty much anything except for killing one of them or even just slightly knocking into their vehicles, which is actually some pretty good social commentary. But seriously, the slightest tap will send them all after you, and these guys are relentless. If you do anything they don't like, they will chase you with guns, vehicles, and even turrets for what feels like an eternity, until you either manage to get the awful stealth mode to work, which is never shown in any kind of tutorial, so I didn't even know about it without the help of a 2003 message board, go into a mission area, or eventually wait for them to stop, which has only happened to me once, and I'm pretty sure it was a glitch. This is abhorrent and made me infuriated every time I made the slight mistake of knocking into one of these morons who are so small and are placed into such a busy, crowded, and annoying environment that hitting them is inevitable. So the world is empty, ridiculously boring to navigate over and over, and filled with some of the worst, most annoying copy-paste enemies who serve as nothing but a constant annoyance. I would say I've played an open world game worse than this, but that would be a lie. I give the open world parts of this a 0.5 out of 5. Seriously, one of the worst things I played in my life, and I'm astonished that Naughty Dog accepted this level of incompetent game design. And you might think that with that, I've said every possible negative thing I have to say, but you'd be wrong about that too. There is one more monumental problem with the gameplay here, and it's the difficulty. The difficulty of Jak II is often reviled by gamers and critics alike, and I have to agree with them. There are practically no checkpoints through many missions. Enemies just come in an absolute onslaught, and it can get to the point that you might just quit halfway through the game or even earlier. Many missions are infamous with pretty much everyone for how bullcrap they are, which is not a good sign, especially when those missions and the terrible driving missions combine to make a number that I honestly feel is way higher than the number of missions I actually liked, which is such a pathetic, loathsome disappointment. There's also practically no health given to you throughout missions. Missions drag on forever with no time to rest, and even your ammo doesn't come back to you after you die. But there are only so many ways I can say Jak II is hard. Hard as a piece of freeze-dried dog feces, so I think it would be better if I gave you all an idea of the absolute misery that parts of Acts 2 and 3 were for me by describing some of the worst missions. Ready? Well, here we go! The first part that really sucked for me was the Shuttle Underground Fighters mission, which is made extremely infuriating due to how easily your brittle little vehicles will be destroyed by the Crimson Guard when trying to escort these ungrateful underground fighters. But it wasn't even close to the worst part of the game. Escort Kid to Power Station is thankfully not too long, but can get really annoying, especially with your ammo being taken from you as you die more and more. Destroy Ship at Drill Platform is actually a fine mission when I look back on it, but the controls are so tough to get used to that raging and hating this mission is perfectly reasonable. Shortly after this, you have to hunt Metalheads, one of the enemies of the game, in the forest. This is pretty fun at first, but the fact that you have to kill 30 enemies without a single checkpoint or health pickup is very annoying. And after this, you get a series of just awful missions. The racing that's way too fast and too hard to control, the Seal Piece mission that is so infamously hard that I didn't even attempt it without the classic punch method, the Hellcat Cruiser mission that nearly broke me and took over an hour to complete, and then Onin's game that is so clearly shoehorned in and is one of the most awful pacing killers of the whole game that I thankfully managed to get through on my first try, just barely, are the next missions, and they really made me start to hate the game. Luckily though, the finale of Act 2 and Mars Tomb redeems it and is one of the best missions of the whole game by far. In fact, probably the best. But Act 3 is trash from the very beginning, without a single legitimately amazing mission for most of it. The horrible Fortress mission, the infamously idiotic Sewer Escort mission, more stupid racing, the annoying as hell bomb bots, and the absolutely mind-grating Arrow Race. I could go on and on and on because this game is packed to the brim with two things: terrible missions and terrible open world segments. I hate this gameplay more than you could ever know, and I think a lot of people do too. The terrible design of nearly every part of the open world, the garbage difficulty at nearly every turn, and the variety that exists just to distract you from how boring Jak II actually is. But that's not all. There are still two more things about this game that are awful. These things aren't fundamental flaws necessarily like everything else I've talked about, but they are very bad. The first is that the gunplay is very awkward to control sometimes. I know I said I liked it, but when I like something about this game, it doesn't mean it's much more than decent, apart from the once again phenomenal platform. The gunplay is fine and good at first, but once you're really put to the test, the lack of any sort of lock-on or strafe button, like was pivotal in every Ratchet & Clank sequel, becomes very noticeable. And with this horrendous Samos mission in the forest, you'll really start to get annoyed with your inability to hit these terrible jetpack enemies. But it's not the worst thing ever. The final major problem I want to talk about is the whole setup of the game. I know I praised it for taking risks, and I maintain that, but it's not as brave as some people make it out to be. In fact, I think they could have more easily banked on this game succeeding than a real sequel to Jak and Daxter. And why is that? Because this game is a messy blend of every single game that was popular at the time and a shameless exploitation of trends in gaming. They take the skating right out of Tony Hawk, the world design right out of Grand Theft Auto, and the guns out of Ratchet & Clank. It's so obvious that rather than actually do something original or stick with the good style they had before, Naughty Dog chose to just capitalize on what was popular, which is shameful and blasphemous in the face of the unique gem that is the original Jak and Daxter. But hey, it's not too bad, because I love Ratchet & Clank. It's just really annoying if you've played and enjoyed the first game like myself. But now that we've gone over everything that I hate about this game, I'd like to end off with what is my favorite part of it: the story. This game has a dark, cinematic, and impressive story that's perfectly serious and funny. The idea of this game being in the future and yet the time travel counterparts being younger versions doesn't make any sense, but it's still absolutely hilarious and really fun to watch. It's really what motivated me to keep playing, as well as the ultimate bragging rights of saying I beat Jak II, which is one of the hardest games I've ever played. The graphics are also really good and noticeably step up from the first game, even though the PS4 port does have quite a few problems with it. And before you say anything, the port is not problematic in terms of gameplay at all, so don't act like anything I talked about was due to a bad version of the game. It was due to terrible design choices in the most fundamental sense. Jak II really surprised me in the worst possible ways. The gameplay might be some of the most frustrating possible. It's not the worst thing to ever exist, because it can at least be called a game, and a damn well polished one at that, but the design is so moronic that I can't see past it. A horrendous open world that was laid out by an OCD-ridden otter, difficulty done by a drugged-up duck, shooting by a spacey spider, and mechanics and missions made by a maniacal mosquito. I would have to say this is the worst sequel to a good game I've ever played, which is really shocking due to how Naughty Dog always does their best with the second game in the series, but I suppose this is the exception. I don't really know what to give this game at the end of the day. At many points while playing it, I would have said it's the worst thing I've ever played, but Heavy Rain also exists, so I don't think that's fair. A 2 out of 5 honestly feels too high, but a 1 feels too low, so I'll compromise and give it a 1.5 out of 5. I'm now very wary of this series and very tired from playing this game, but hopefully the next game can redeem it. Well, we'll see you next week with Jak III.